Thanks for tuning in to the Lifting Cues podcast, the podcast for lifters. And if there was ever an episode for lifters, it is going to be this one. This episode is all about strength and hypertrophy. How do they relate? How do we maximize both? Everything every lifter cares about. How do we get stronger? How do we get more jacked? How do we do both? How are we able to maximize it? Also, why are there people that are smaller than us that are way stronger than us? It's annoying, but there's a good reason for it, and we can, if we know and understand how to develop strength and muscle, we can marry both of those two to be as strong as humanly possible and maybe get stronger than that guy that's still smaller than us. So stay tuned. We're going to dive deep into that. But first of all, I'm your host, Coach Quinn, aka Coach Q. I'm an online and in-person fitness coach who specializes in training and nutrition plans to maximize strength and physique development. I've been a lifter for over half of my life, and now in my 30s, I am diving into becoming a competitive power lifter. I'm going to use my own personal experience along with real-world results with real people to give you the best lifting cues to help you reach whatever your goal is. And today, if your goal is getting strong or getting jacked, or it's both, then this podcast is for you. So stay tuned. We're going to dive deep into both of those. So this podcast started out, I really wanted to answer, just a bunch of common lifting questions that many people have. I was just going to go down a list, knock out a bunch of them. So I put out a little post on Instagram, CoachQ_fitness. If you do have a question or, look out for my post for questions to be asked, you can send me a DM, comment on my post. I will answer your questions on the podcast. If I can turn them into a whole episode like this one, I will, but I will definitely get your questions answered. This is called the Lifting Cues podcast, so that's exactly what I want to do is answer your lifting questions. So send them my way. I got one from my friend and colleague, Coach G. Coach G CSCS on Instagram. He's a great follow. He's an awesome coach. I learn a ton from him. One of the best lifters that I know. I learned even more by training with this dude. So I'm really glad that he asked me this question, and it really got me to dive way deep down a rabbit hole and allow me to nerd out on strength and biomechanics and muscle. And I'm hoping to package that all up and deliver it to you guys in something that will make a lot of sense for you and really help you out. So what he asked was, what is the overlap between strength and hypertrophy, and how does this change with experience? So like I kind of alluded to before, there's people that don't have as much muscle, and that's what we're going to refer to as hypertrophy. If you are new to this lifting thing, hypertrophy means building muscle. So when you hear me say that, it's synonymous with building muscle. But how do those two things relate? Because again, we do see people that are smaller than us that are able to lift more than other people. This came from personal experience. I competed in my first powerlifting meet a few months ago. And in that meet, the person who beat me didn't nearly have the appearance of muscle mass that maybe I had, to just give myself a little narcissistic time for a second. I definitely had more muscle than this guy, but he was able to beat me in this meet. He's been powerlifting for a really long time. He's really good at it. He's been a champion before. So, I feel no shame in losing to him. He's an awesome competitor, but it's like, if you just paired the two of us up and said which person's going to be stronger, you'd probably pick me for my own narcissistic self. This is my podcast. So yeah, I'm going to talk about me. But beside the point. So, a lot of people will probably just think like, oh, more muscle makes you stronger. If you lift weights and get stronger, you will get more muscle. So doesn't, more muscle just equal more strength? I don't understand why there needs to be a whole podcast about this. But when we actually dig into it, we learn why. So yes, lifting weights and getting stronger will get you more muscle. And tracking your strength over time, if your goal is to build more muscle, is a good predictor of, are you actually getting bigger? If you continue to get stronger and progress in the gym, that is one way that we know that we're probably building some muscle. But does that top out at some point? And can we get stronger without building a ton of muscle? These are the questions that as you dig into this, you start to learn. So to fully understand, the difference between strength and hypertrophy, we need to understand both. So when we talk about strength is determined really by what I'll call three factors. There's three main things that go into strength. We'll get to muscle mass. I'm going to put that last so that we can connect everything then. But when we look at it, the first thing really is kind of motor skill development and skill development. So strength is a very specific activity. So if you want to get stronger at, a barbell back squat, you should barbell back squat. That is going to get you stronger. A person that barbell back squats versus a person that leg presses, while both of their legs will get stronger, you will get stronger in the barbell back squat if you only barbell back squat. This is because your body has to learn how to do the movement. You need to learn how to do the movement efficiently so that you can continue to load it. And as you get better, you will get stronger. Now, you will obviously get stronger as a whole. When they do studies comparing, a leg press to a back squat, both of them get stronger. Just the people that do the back squat get a little bit stronger at the back squat, but the leg press people still get also stronger at the back squat. So anything that makes you stronger will make you generally stronger. Like anything that strengthens your legs will make your legs stronger, so on and so forth. But if you want to get significantly strong at a specific task, you need to do that specific task so that you learn how to do it. Now, there is something else that goes along with this that it kind of ties into muscle mass, but also I think ties in more here. So there's something called normalized muscle force. Now, this is your muscle's ability to transfer information to tendons to then pull on the bone to then make your joints or your bones move around the joint and allow you to perform movements under load. So when you do a squat, when you get down to the bottom of a squat, you have to transfer force from your muscles to your tendons to tell them to pull on that joint and then move. Now, this gets better as we continue to do more reps. So this is why I kind of lump it in with the motor skill development, because this seems to be a practice thing that's what gets you better at it, is more and more practice at it. And then as you're able to progress load, your body gets more and more efficient because it has to. It's like, as you're putting more weight on your back, it has to transfer more force. It has to do that quicker. So your body is learning over time how to really normalize this force and connect all the muscles needed to be able to do a movement. So that's why I'm going to lump it in here, but you'll see how muscle connects to this normalized muscle force as well. Obviously, it is called muscle. The muscle has to do something, but I think this is kind of more a learned activity of how do I transfer force in the right places in the right ways? Because if you notice, like someone who's a very good squatter or deadlifter or, any of those kind of big full body compound lifts, you don't necessarily feel one muscle. All the muscles are connecting and working together to perform a movement. I'm not necessarily just squeezing and isolating a muscle. So when someone asks you, like, where am I supposed to feel it in a deadlift? Everywhere. So it's all of these things coming together, and that is a learned activity that continues to get better under load and by doing more reps. So by practicing the lift more, and like I said, as you get heavier, you get better at that transfer of force. Also, there are psychological factors that are going to be involved in strength. So there's a confidence aspect. You have to be confident enough to know that you can do the movement and be, understand that you're not going to get injured under the load or anything like that. So when we're considering strength, that is a psychological factor. If I can take somebody who is super strong, like maybe they can leg press, the world with good range of motion. Not many people can, but beside the point, that's for another podcast. But if you tell them to do a barbell back squat and they've never done it, and ask them to do anywhere close to the amount of weight they were doing on the leg press, they probably won't be able to do it because they're psychologically, they don't understand what it is, and feeling the weight on their back, maybe they lose some confidence, maybe there's some fear there. So there is a lot of psychological factor that just practicing the movement and understanding that you can perform a movement and perform it correctly and perform it under load, significant load, there is that aspect of it as well that has nothing to do with your muscle mass. I mean, maybe if you're a little bit more jacked, you're a little more confident in yourself and your abilities, but that's again probably just because you've been doing this for a really long time if you've built that amount of muscle. So, but understanding the movement, having confidence, lacking fear, and just having an understanding of exactly what you're doing. Because, you know, when I'm trying to complete a heavy lift or a lift that a weight that I've never done before, I'm not thinking about how heavy it is. I can't. It's just not. It's not going to work. It's not something that would be, you know, conducive to me getting under the bar with confidence. I know exactly what I'm doing. I've progressed properly, and I know for a fact I can do this lift. It's just a matter of getting myself to complete the movement. Psychologically, I am confident. I am not afraid. All of those things really come into play when it comes to, you know, aspects of strength and completing specific lifts. So, developing that psychological understanding. Now, let's get to how muscle mass actually affects lifting. So this is the third component, and this is going to be referred to as maximal joint moments, or you can, when you hear the word moment, think torque. So this is the amount of torque put on the joint to make that joint move. So how does this happen? So basically it's determined in an equation by your limb lengths, the joint angle that you're at, and how much force you can produce. Where is force produced from? Force is produced by the muscle. How hard can the muscle contract? That is what is going to produce force. So if we think about those three things, limb lengths, joint angles, and muscle force, what is the thing that we can control the most? So our limb lengths, if we're fully grown, we're pretty much stuck. You can have some crazy expensive surgery that you have to recover from forever to make you taller. But my guess is you're probably not going to be that strong after that. That's a lot to go through. I don't even know why I brought it up. But basically, again, your limb lengths are stuck. Your joint angles. Now, we can probably figure out how to maximize our joint angles. So figuring out if your limb lengths allow you to be more of a low bar, glute dominant squatter, or are you more of a high bar, quad dominant squatter based on your limb lengths? You know, what's the best grip for your bench to maximize your joint angles? But you will figure that out over time. That comes with that motor skill development, the normalized muscle force, where am I the strongest? So eventually, if you lift long enough and try to get strong long enough, you will probably find the joint angles that work for you, and you're going to max those out. Because your limb lengths are stuck, the joint angle that you're strongest at is also going to be kind of fixed. So what do we have left? How do we produce more force? Force is going to be determined by muscle circumference. So this is where muscle mass comes into play. A bigger muscle can produce more force because it has more contractile units. So think about it this way, using the bicep as an example. When you flex your bicep, it goes up because there are contractile units that are reaching out, grabbing each other, and the tissue is actually stacking on top of each other. So the higher that bicep comes up, the more contractile units I have and the more force I can produce. So a bigger muscle will in turn produce more force. And that is the way that we can increase the torque that is placed on the joints and allow us to move more weight under load. So that is where the muscle mass plays a factor. And I am guessing normalized muscle force will also be affected by the muscle's ability to produce more force. If it can produce more force and you learn that movement over time, I would guess the transfer of force to tendons and the connection between all of the musculature that needs to move to perform something like a squat or a bench or a deadlift would all increase as well. So you can increase it a little bit after you've kind of maxed out the movement, motor skill, neurological component or neuromuscular component of it. So you should be able to do all of those things as well. So that kind of connects where muscle mass can affect strength. If we are bigger, once we have maxed out kind of the motor skill development, the neuromuscular component, the normalized muscle force, and our psychological component, we know what we can lift. Then everything else kind of, the only thing that's left to do is get more jacked, I guess. So that's kind of where the connection comes in. So if you hear, a power lifter kind of talk about, oh, I don't do hypertrophy work because I need to lift heavier. I need to just get strong. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe they could actually benefit from some more hypertrophy training, putting on some more muscle. Because if you've been doing this for a long time, you can't really get much better at the squat. Once I know how to squat, it's just a matter of continuing to progress load over time as I adapt to it. But maybe we could speed that process up by building more muscle on top of it. You know how to squat. You're not going to forget. You have to keep practicing it and keep that, second nature aspect of it. But maybe we could build some more muscle. So how do we go about building more muscle? We know to build more strength, we have to be specific in the exercises that we want to get stronger at. We have to develop those motor skills, the normalized muscle force to be able to complete the movement. We have to develop our psychology, the confidence, the lack of fear, the understanding of what it's like to lift heavy loads and be able to be confident and not afraid of those, to be able to complete a lift under load and maximize our strength. Also, we know that we have to maximize joint moments or torque, which is mainly produced by, increasing muscle force, and that is done by increasing muscle size. Now, when it comes to increasing that muscle size, how do we do that? The main factor, and I'm gonna say this is basically the only factor to increasing muscle size, truly increasing muscle size, it's mechanical tension. What is mechanical tension? It is exactly what it sounds like. It is the amount of tension placed on the body that the muscles must move or resist movement, because it happens in both the contraction and the stretch. And how the stretch actually affects muscle growth is yet to kind of be seen. But if we think about this, so muscles only pull. A muscle only contracts. So as you stretch it out under load, it is forcing itself. It is trying to contract to fight against that movement. So it is pulling back against that movement. So it is actually producing force, and there is tension on that muscle. So these eccentrics, where we're really getting stretched out, adding that extra stretch to the muscle, focusing on that eccentric, I think it actually is producing more tension. Now, I'm theorizing here a little bit, but based off of other smart people whose work I've read and paid attention to, it kind of seems like that might be the reason that the stretch is so effective for muscle growth as well, because it is increasing that tension, maybe even to a higher degree than the contraction actually is. So we know that providing more tension over time is going to help us build muscle, both in the stretch and the contraction. They're both going to be important for building muscle. How do we achieve this? So the main way we're going to look at mechanical tension, at least from my perspective, and the way I'm going to explain it to you, is volume load. So we're looking at volume load over time. How do we increase that volume load over time? What is volume load? It is sets times reps times weight. So it is the total volume that you are moving in a session, in a week. Probably going to use it weekly to describe this, because I think it makes more sense, especially because you can't train the muscle groups you want as much as I think you need to in just one session. I mean, you could, but it's a lot harder to kind of maximize that. So when we look at how do we increase volume load, so we can increase sets, we can increase reps, or we can increase weight, or we can do a combination of both. But those are obviously the main factors in that. And you can see how, being a multiplication equation, increasing weight might be a heavier influencer on volume load than you might think. So when people say, you can't lift heavy to build muscle because you can't do enough reps. It's like, well, if I take my squat from 400 pounds to 450 pounds and I did, let's just say for math's sake, one set for one rep at 400, now we did 450, the tension placed on that, the volume load went up by 50 pounds. So, I mean, that's considerate, especially if you can do, multiple reps for multiple sets. So adding weight is a great way to put mechanical tension on the muscle. Also, you can add reps. You can do the double progression method where you have a rep range. So you pick a weight that you can do for 6. You keep doing that weight until you can get 8. So we've increased reps. Now we're going to increase weight and repeat that process. So we continue to increase weight and reps over time. We can keep the sets the same. Sets are a tough one because you likely only have so much time in the gym. So you have to fit in your sets where you can. You can't just increase sets forever. But there does appear to be a number of sets that is required, a minimum number of sets that is required to maximize muscle growth. It looks like anywhere in the 12 to 20 sets per week range is going to be the best for muscle growth. Now, when we talk about sets, I'm talking about hard sets. So for a set to count for hypertrophy, in my opinion, and based on most of the literature that we've seen, it needs to be a quote unquote hard set. How do we define a hard set? So I'm going to use there's two main ways that we can base the intensity of a set. So one is rate of perceived exertion. I like rate of perceived exertion a little bit better because I think it just makes a little bit more sense. So you have a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being the easiest thing you've ever done, sitting on the couch watching TV. 10 being the absolute hardest thing you've ever done. Your absolute max 1 rep, squat, deadlift, lift, whatever it is. You couldn't do another possible rep if you even had to. If your life depended on it, that's a 10. So where do you want to get to for hypertrophy? So it appears that anything under, I would say like a 6 RPE would be basically useless. How do you gauge what a 6 RPE is? This is where the other scale comes into play. So both of these scales are going to affect it in a way. So there's also what's called the reps in reserve scale. So this is how many reps did I have left? How many reps could I have done when I terminated the set? So if you're doing a set of 8 and you get to that set of 8 and you're like, man, I had 12 in me, then that was a 6 RPE or a 4 RIR. So RPE, rate of perceived exertion, RIR, reps in reserve. So that's kind of how we're going to gauge intensity. So it appears to be the minimum that you should expect for muscle growth, I would say is probably a 6 or a 7 RPE or a 3 or a 4 RIR. Now, I recommend going a little bit higher than that, going to a 1 or 2 RIR or 8 or 9 RPE for a couple of reasons. One, as RIR and RPE get lower on the scale, so in the 4 to 6 range, as we're farther away from failure, we appear to be much less accurate at gauging, how many reps we had left in the tank. When you have to guess more or think about, further down the line, we appear to be a little bit worse. So I recommend pushing a little bit closer to failure just to make sure that we really get there. As you get closer to that 8, 9 RPE, you're going to really start to feel that. When you have 1 or 2 reps left, like, oh, I might be able to eke a couple out, like, that's going to be a much more accurate measure. So pushing to there is going to get you closer to that failure point. Now, a lot of people you'll hear these days are saying, just train to failure. You have to train to absolute failure or you're wasting your time. I don't actually believe this is the case. The recovery cost and the mental aspect of training to failure on everything you do is really freaking high. So it doesn't appear that 1 to 2 RIR, 8 to 9 RPE is any different than training to failure. So why do it? Like if you go to a true true 1 or 2 RIR, it's a really hard set. Like, do that on the leg press for, a set of 8 that's heavy. It's going to hurt. Like, it's really, really hard. So I don't think you're leaving anything in the tank. I think a lot of people tend to assume that people suck at estimating their RIR and how many reps they actually had left. It doesn't appear to be that bad. Like I said, especially when you're getting closer and closer to failure. Like, if I ask you on your second rep how many more you have left, and you say, 5, but really you had 10, like, it's hard to gauge. But if I asked you at 10 how many you had left and you said 2, you might get 4, but like, again, you're still in that higher intensity range. So it's like, yeah, sure, if, figurative gun to your head, like, how many reps could you, like, keep going? Like, maybe you could have eked out 1 or 2 more when you said it was, when you said you were at failure even. But so just thinking about that intensity, the main fact of it is you have to push these sets hard. So how do we maximize? How do we get our 12 to 20 sets in a rep range and weights that we can push to the intensity that we need to and still recover from? Those are the biggest things, and be able to hit all the muscle groups that we really want to grow. So this is where we have to kind of be creative or, really be good with our programming as to what we're going to focus on. As you can see, this may not be a place to lift super heavy because we have to push that intensity so high. This may not be the spot to lift super, super heavy. It may not be the place to squat 450 for 3 reps to, an 8 or a 9 RPE, because that's going to be super taxing. The rest of our session is going to be way more lax. We're probably going to get less overall volume out of it. We'll be more fatigued, the mental cost of doing that, and then the recovery cost on top of it. So how much, like, the next day, are we ready to train again? Because, we've been so beat up by these high intensity squats. So this is why you'll see people go with lighter weights, more volume, more isolation exercises, because single muscle group movements that aren't multi-joint, requiring all these different muscles to work at the same time, getting all of these things in, putting weight on your back, picking up heavy weight, putting stress on your spine, is fatiguing in and of itself. So you'll see people go to more machine-based and isolation-based exercises to reach these kind of volumes and intensities and be able to recover from them. So that is why you see, the recommendation of going higher rep, lighter weight to build muscle, and all of these different kind of things. But it isn't to say that you can't build muscle by lifting heavy. Again, pushing that intensity, getting that, volume load up. If we do heavy 3x5 squats, is that much different than doing 4x12 leg presses, to the same intensity? Maybe not. They've even been able to show that you can build muscle in like the 3 to 5 rep range. So if you do want to try and get strong and still build muscle at the same time, it seems like you can do both. And you don't have to just train with like sets of 20, sets of 15. Like, guys, I'll tell you right now, straight up, I hate doing anything for more than like 15 reps. Like, if I pick a weight too light for like tricep extensions, like, and I get to 15 and I'm not really tired yet, I get pissed. I'm like, I don't want to keep doing this. So like, maybe you just don't like to train that way, so it leads to lower training intensity. You like to lift a little bit heavier. Don't think that you can't and you're not going to build muscle or maximize muscle. You just have to pick your spots accordingly, because again, that recovery cost is going to be high when you're doing big compound movements. And that's why also, to kind of bring it back, how do we lift for strength? So we know how to lift for, muscle building. So we're going to get in our 12 to 20 sets that are at the intensity that we want, in a rep range and with a load that gets us to that intensity, but that we're able to still recover from. And selecting exercises that allow us to do that at a lower recovery cost and really hit the muscle groups that we want. You want to think more about the isolation of the muscle groups. If you really want to grow your lats, think about, where do I get the most stretch in my lats? Maybe, a straight arm pull down coming from out in front of you isn't the best thing for strength, but it's the best thing for your muscle because you get a great stretch in the lats, you build a great mind muscle connection, you're really contracting and fighting that movement to stretch it out. Maybe that's a great movement to build muscle, but if you're just trying to get strong, that's not the best. But instead of doing, chin-ups to failure or heavy lat pull downs that are really going to wear you out, or heavy barbell rows, maybe we can use this single arm pull down to lower our recovery costs, but still build our lats. So that's just an example of how exercise selection is really key also to muscle building. So what is the best thing for us, our range of motion, our limb length? So testing these out for yourself, and what do you recover from the best? So I think that's where it kind of comes into play. So that's how we're going to build our muscle building program. But then how do we build we didn't really go over how to build a strength program. So when we're lifting for strength, like I said, the goal is to develop motor skills, neuromuscular connections, the psychological aspect, being able to produce force. All of these things have to be done under heavy loads to be able to maximally lift heavy loads. The goal is to lift as heavy as possible for one rep. Maybe you have like a 3-rep max test that you don't like to max out all the time, but you test your strength with 3 reps. Still, it's going to be considerably heavier. It's going to be very heavy, and you have to practice with heavy loads to be able to do that. So we have to lift with heavy loads. So when we looked at, the volume load equation, what can we do if the loads are really heavy? We're going to have to bring reps down. We're just not going to be able to do that many reps. And also we can bring sets down a little bit. I'm going to explain how a beginner can kind of manipulate this a little bit, but okay, let's think about it. Most of our strength gains are going to come from things that are not muscle building activities. It is developing motor skills, neuromuscular connections, psychological aspects, and we're lifting now with heavy loads. So we actually don't need to go to the intensity that we do for muscle growth. We're not trying to maximize muscle growth in our big strength movements. At these heavy weights, the goal is not necessarily to maximize muscle growth. If it is, we have to push that intensity up, but because we're really just trying to get adapted, our body's adapted to the load and master these movement patterns. We just need to perform the movement patterns. So the intensity does not have to be there. We actually don't really have to get over a 6 or 7 RPE too often, especially in sets of like 3 to 5. We're really just trying to get very, very good and efficient at the movement. Now, there will be times to push heavy singles in training so that you understand how to do that, how to grind through reps, how to do an ugly rep, having your body in slightly compromised positions that you might end up in is good to practice, but we don't want to do this all the time. We don't need to. We're going to continue to develop those neuromuscular skills. And with that, we're doing high weights, low reps, about 5, I think, is the max. Maybe you could push some like sets of 6 to 8 just to kind of build up, again, those motor skills and stuff like that, or maybe at the beginning of a block to get yourself acclimated again to a little bit more volume. But most of the time we're going to be working in 5 reps and below because that weight is so heavy. And when it comes to sets per week, we really need to do about 6 to 9 of these hard sets. And when I say hard sets in relation to strength, we're talking 6 to 7 RPE, 3 to 4 RIR. So if you're doing a set of 5, you should be able to do 8, 9, maybe 10. Like it might be okay if you could really grind out. I mean, look, when the weights get heavy and you put that weight on your back or you have to pick it up off the floor or off your chest, like you'll get to a point where it never really feels that light. Yeah, sure, you could keep grinding out reps, but at what cost? So we're going to focus on the 6 to 9 set range per week. So however that works out into your schedule, however you need to break that out, maybe, 3 sets of heavy squats really crushes you. So we have to break that up in 2 parts of the week, and we do, 3 sets one day, 3 sets the other. And like I said, as you get better and better at these motor skills, there's only so much better that we can get. We just have to keep adapting to the load. We just have to keep trying to progress load. We're not really we don't have to do things over and over and over and over and over again just to get, minusculely better. Once we're already good, we're good. Now, while you're learning the movements and your weights are much lighter, sure, you can do many more sets per week to really learn the movement, master it, and, really progress the load much faster. But you're eventually going to hit a load where the recovery cost is just going to be a lot, and you're going to have to scale back volume. And once you're really, really good, there's some evidence that minimum effective dose training can really be effective for strength, and we can do as little as 3 hard sets per week for an exercise and still continue to see strength gains because we lower that recovery cost. We're already very good at the movement. We're not getting much better. Motor skills, normalized muscle force, the psychological factors, we got all that. And then we can focus maybe more time on getting bigger instead of just, crushing ourselves under heavy loads at high intensities. So maybe you can manipulate that a little bit, the volume that you're doing for strength as you get better and better. So as a novice or someone who's new to really strength training, maybe a little bit more volume until you start to reach loads that you can no longer get any better at. So that's really what we're going to focus on there for strength, is working 6 to 9 sets per week of the movements that we want to get stronger at in the 1 to 5 rep range at, heavy loads that get us to at least like a 6 or 7 RPE so that we can maintain our recovery and still be able to, get strong. And now that we know how to get strong and how to get jacked, where is this overlap? So you can see by this very specific strength training, we are performing these movements over and over again under heavier and heavier loads, and that's why we get stronger. And that is probably why you would see someone who is not quite as big as another person is able to squat more than them. Now, if we put them on a very stable surface, if we had 2 people comparing, 2 people with different leg sizes, and we put them on a very stable surface and just looked at, the force that they could produce with their legs, maybe the bigger person could produce more force, but the person who is, stronger at the barbell back squat might not be able to produce as much force just with their legs, but they're able to do the back squat better because they just are better at it. They've developed better motor skills. The other person hasn't really trained this lift quite as much. And I think that might be where I'm at right now, is like, I look like I should be able to lift more than a couple of other people in, an event, but I'm not as practiced or seasoned at the lifts yet to be able to execute them the way that they can. So I haven't taken the time to really develop all of the motor skills that I need, the neuromuscular connections, and just, perfect these movements to the point where I can utilize all of the power to move in the way that I need to lift these specific ways. So I think that's where, we see that people that are smaller are stronger. And it's also, I think, why you see people that just start out in the gym are able to make really significant gains in strength before they see a ton of muscle gain. Because we have to increase that mechanical tension over time, we aren't able to kind of get there with just, a few weeks of training. It's just not enough. And you haven't learned, how to push that intensity to the highest level because your muscles get fatigued quicker. When you feel that burn, you want to stop, and you have to learn how to fight through that. So that's where, learning lifting is part of muscle building as well. But you're developing these motor skills, the neuromuscular connections, the psychological factors. You're seeing weights go up really, really quick because you're learning the movements. You feel great, and you keep putting weight on the bar. So you see people get very strong before they can get quite as jacked. And, You don't understand the focus that it takes to, hit each individual muscle group. You're just in there doing, basic compound lifts, getting much stronger, which is great. And I think that's where everyone should start. I think you should start by getting strong first, and then we'll focus on muscle building. Because if we think about it, if we get strong, we're going to develop great motor skills, great movement patterns, better function in our body, better stability, all things that are only going to help us once we get to, that muscle building phase or that muscle building time in our lifting career. So if we can focus on getting strong, it'll also only help us to be able to progress in multiple ways. We can keep progressing load. We can keep that load portion of the volume load equation pretty high, and then be able to kind of increase reps until our recovery cost gets too high, and then we can manipulate there. But it allows you to progress in multiple ways. I can manipulate load if I'm stronger. I can continue to go up because I understand how to do that. I'm psychologically capable of lifting more weight. It doesn't scare me. Those kind of things. You can also continue to increase reps at a certain load if you're already pretty strong. You got the movement down. You feel a little bit more comfortable pushing reps a little higher. You'll feel comfortable pushing that intensity. If you've ever done something like a 1 rep max, or, really tried to maximize your strength to that point where you're lifting a heavy load pretty close to failure, you learn very quickly what failure feels like and what it feels like to not be able to do another rep. So you'll be able to push that in exercises that are even safer and continue to push and know that, your body's not going to give out, you're not going to break. So you can continue to push the intensity much higher, and this is going to allow you to progress in multiple ways. Also, it should help your range of motion. If you're training for strength, again, with better function, better movement patterns, we understand how to move the body, how different muscles feel, so we can kind of build that mind-muscle connection a little bit so that when you go to a muscle building phase, it can help you a lot. So that's why I think building strength to start is really, really important. And if you've never done any really strength-focused training, I think it might be a great idea for you to do that. If you feel like you're kind of plateaued in where you are with your muscle building and, the same old exercises aren't working anymore. Like I see a lot of people that want to grow like their triceps or something, and all they're doing is, freaking skull crushers over and over again, and cable push downs and overhead extensions. They're doing all these things over and over, and they're getting up into high rep ranges, and they're going to failure, and their triceps just won't grow. But I never see them press anything heavy. It's like, maybe you need to do that. Maybe you need to develop better, force production, better motor skills to be able to move that with more force and be able to move more weight with that muscle. So maybe that's something to think about if you're stuck on a certain, with a certain muscle group in muscle building. So this is, again, where the overlap comes in. I really think strength is very important for muscle building. You're not going to see too many weak bodybuilders that are good, like good bodybuilders that are really weak. It just doesn't really happen. Like, they're all pretty strong. Like, I think about somebody like, now we're getting into steroid stuff, but you think about somebody like Phil Heath. He did everything at high volumes, but he was still squatting like 405 for sets of 20. Like, that's not a weak human. That's really strong. So developing some form of strength, some baseline level of strength, I think is really important. What that baseline is, you can argue it, but here's my criteria. You should be able to deadlift twice your body weight. You should be able to squat 1.5 times your body weight, and you should be able to bench 1 times your body weight as a man. As a female, maybe 1.75 for the deadlift. I think it's still probably 2. I know some ladies that can deadlift a good bit of weight, but we'll say 1.75 body weight, 1.25 body weight squat, and a 0.75 bench. So if you want to be sufficiently or relatively strong, I think that's those are the numbers that you should be able to hit. And if you're kind of stuck in your muscle building career and you're plateaued in certain areas, maybe looking at those strength numbers and am I actually strong enough to continue to progress and move more weight? I think might be an area that if you're stuck with muscle building, you can go to strength. Once you've developed a sufficient amount of strength, now we've developed the motor skills, the neuromuscular connections. I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. This is how we get stronger, guys. This is how we get stronger. You got to keep doing it. Keep doing it. Anyway, once we've done it sufficiently and we are relatively and sufficiently strong, then the last thing to do is, well, shit, we just got to get more jacked. So now it's time to start building some muscle. So maybe focusing on, okay, what are the muscle groups that I need to bring up to help my lifts? So when you're thinking about the bench, you're thinking about how do I get my pecs bigger? How do I get my front delts bigger? How do I get my triceps bigger? Specifically the short head of the tricep, so doing more close grip press, JM press, tricep push downs, things that work the short head and make that bigger is going to be more beneficial. Now, flip side, you're thinking about building muscle. I want my triceps to look bigger. We're going to think more about the long head. So in that overhead position, all stretched out. Now, that will contribute to your pressing, but the short head is going to be more important. So this is where, deciding exactly what exercises you want to get each muscle bigger. We can get really, really detailed into this with a bunch of different examples, but that's the main thing is, okay, I'm sufficiently strong. I know where the force just isn't there. So how do I make those muscles bigger? So that's where, you can go into that exercise selection of muscle building to make sure, okay, I need to hit this volume at those muscle groups. All the other muscle groups we can just maintain. And when we're maintaining strength, it seems to be that 6 to 9 rep range or set range per week, provided the intensity is there. You can cut that intensity back just to maintain. So if you have very specific areas you want to grow muscle in, you can focus on those and scale back others so that you are able to recover and actually grow in the areas that you want. I spent a long time last year growing specifically my lats and my quads. So everything I did leg focused was quads. Hamstrings were left very minimal. Glutes even, all of my squats, I'm pretty glute dominant, so I got a lot there, but, a lot of quad dominant exercises. And then I focused mostly on my lats and my back for my upper body training and left, my chest, front delts, I kind of just minimized that volume and just maintained as much muscle as I could. And it really worked. I was able to recover. I got much more jacked. Now getting into the powerlifting side of things, I need to get my shoulders stronger again, my chest stronger again. So I'm going to focus more on that, maybe just maintain my back. So this is where we shift the focus from strength to muscle, and we marry those two things is how do we get them both to match so that we can maximize our strength and maximize our muscle so that, we look as strong as we actually are. So, when somebody asks you to help them move and help them pick up their couch, don't just look like you can do it, you can actually do it. So making sure that at different points in time, we need to focus on getting strong. How do we make sure that we get sufficiently strong and then maintain that strength? And then when do we spend time building muscle? Now that we're sufficiently strong, we can now start to just build muscle, maintain that strength, and build muscle in all of the areas that we want. And then, you get into exercise selection and manipulating volume and your recovery and all of that stuff. So I hope that helps you, in your journey to get as strong and jacked as humanly possible and answers all of your lifting questions. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me on Instagram at CoachQ_fitness, Coach Q on Facebook. Drop a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Ask your questions there. Let me know what I missed, what you're doing in your training. I want to know it all. So tell me, comment on my posts, do all of that stuff. And then, again, make sure, like, rate, subscribe. I don't want you to miss a podcast. I don't want you to miss a lifting cue. I am here to help you on your lifting journey, reach whatever it is your goals are. I'll see you guys in the next episode.